Okay, let's get started. So welcome to part 3 of my webinar series on the Vault API. This time through we're going to talk about Vault Explorer customization. Just a quick recap of who I am, in case you haven't seen the first two. My name's Doug Redmond. I'm a programmer on the Vault team. And one of my functions on the Vault team is to be the API expert, so to speak, to kind of oversee some of the API features and to kind of help along outside developers who want to customize Vault through programming. I also have a blog which I update regularly with a bunch of information about the Vault API, and it also contains a bunch of programs you can download and source code and goodies like that. So a bit about this webinar series. So there's 5 total, 5 webinar sessions. This is part 3. In part 1, I just gave kind of an overview of the Vault API and all of the different aspects of it. And then in parts 2 through 5, the idea is to drill down into specific areas. Now in part 2, I talked about how to communicate with the server, which is a really big topic when you think about it, because that covers pretty much every feature that the server can do. So that session was just kind of a mad rush for me to try to cram as much information into it as possible within the time limit. But this one we're doing today, we're just going to focus on customizing Vault Explorer. The pace should be much slower this time. I don't have nearly as much to cover. And in the past 2 sessions, I had tagged this as an intermediate skill level class, this one today. But now that I actually have the slide decks all prepared and everything, I've changed my mind. The stuff I'm going to be going over today is really not that difficult. I would classify it as kind of a beginner skill level. But when we get into things like job server customization, that's a bit trickier to deal with. And then the last one, event-based programming, is more of an advanced programming topic. And yes, I am recording this session. All 5 sessions are being recorded, and I'll make sure to post them all after the series is completed. Part 1's already up on my blog, and then parts 2 through 5 will be posted after I'm finished. Okay, so the goals for today. I want to kind of explain how to write custom commands inside of Vault Explorer. I'm going to talk a bit about custom tab views in Vault Explorer. And then I'm going to spend some time talking just about like the build steps, the deployment steps, all of kind of the little things you need to do to get it up and running. And that's really it. As far as the requirements for you guys, I'm going to assume you already know about the Vault product line and what it does. And I'll assume that you have some level of programming experience. You don't need to be a professional programmer. If you have backgrounds writing like VB scripts or something, that's good as well. But you know, some level of experience programming. So here's kind of the outline of the class. I'm going to start with an overview of some of the technology. I'm going to play a demo for you. It's a pre-recorded video. I'm just going to talk over it. Then I'm going to kind of go into some of the various aspects of custom commands and custom tabs. And then that'll be it. Then we'll have QA. And at any time, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the questions box. And I won't be able to get to it till the end, but feel free to ask the question at any time. Okay, so let's start with an overview of some of the technology here. So this is kind of the diagram I like to show in all of the sessions. It kind of shows all the different pieces. And I just kind of want to make it clear what piece we're talking about today. It's this client we have called Vault Explorer. It's kind of like the default client. And I think we don't actually name it Vault Explorer. Whatever product you've installed, we just call it that. So if you've installed Vault Workgroup, you would launch the Vault Workgroup icon, and it would bring up this program. But I'm going to call it Vault Explorer because it's kind of the same underlying program in all 4 different product lines. So here's kind of an example of what I'm going to be talking about. So this is the Vault Explorer client that you should all recognize. And in this screenshot, there's some custom commands that have been inserted. So there's this show user history command. It's showing up on the file context menu, and it's also showing up in the toolbar. So that's an example of a custom command. And also on the bottom there, there's a custom tab view. And in that case, it's just they stuck an IE control inside. But that's kind of the basic thing that I'm going to be showing today is how to put in your own tabs and your own commands. So a bit about the technology here. So first, this feature is not available in base Vault. You have to have Vault Workgroup or above if you want to add in your own custom commands. How you do it is you're going to be creating your own .NET assembly. And you build it a certain way, you deploy it to a certain spot, and Vault Explorer will load it in next time you start it up. So what can you do inside of your custom command or your custom tab view? Well, you can do anything that a .NET assembly can do. We don't put in extra security restrictions or anything. You can pop up your own dialogues if you want. You can connect to other systems if you want. If there's another API that you want to make use of, like Inventor or AutoCAD or something, you can do that. If you want to deal with COM controls, it's possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. And same thing with WPF. If you want to do kind of a prettier control, I believe there's a way to get that running. Vault Explorer itself is WinForms, but there are ways you can get WPF to work inside of a WinForms application. As far as programming goes, you can use anything supported by .NET. So C#, VB.NET, PowerShell, a bunch of other languages are available. So whatever you feel comfortable in. I myself am a C# guy. Now, in terms of how you interact with the Vault Explorer application, so you're this plugin, and there's certain things you get to have access to when you're plugged in. So one thing you get is the security context. So when the user launches Vault Explorer, they're going to log in, and your plugin can basically piggyback off that login, so you don't have to sign in again. You can just reuse the existing connection. You also get to know a lot about what things are selected in what areas of the program. So that's very helpful because usually you're going to be doing something to those selected objects. So you want a way to locate them. You also get various events that your code will be called when certain things happen. So there's a startup and a shutdown. That's when the application is launched or the user hits exit. There's also a log on and log off event. So just because they've launched the application doesn't mean they signed in yet. Once they sign in, you get this on login event. There's a command begin and a command end set of hooks that you can hook into. I'm going to talk about that a bit more in part 5. The quick explanation for now is that basically any command that is executed in the UI, like if the user clicks on a toolbar button or selects something from the file menu, you can get notification that a command has been executed. So you get a begin and an end event, and you get to know kind of the code for that command, and that's pretty much all it does. Moving on. So if you've got a custom command, you're going to get an execute event when the user, selects that command. Either they hit the button in the toolbar or select it from a menu or something. When the user does that, your code gets invoked. If you've got a custom tab view, you get an event when the selection has changed in the main grid area. So that's when your code gets invoked and says, okay, this is the object that's selected, and then you can fill out your tab based on that selection. Okay, a couple of other nice features. So when you've got a command, you get to choose where you want that command to show up. And you can even have it show up in multiple spots if you want. We don't limit it. I know some of the other systems will put all the add-ins under like an add-in menu or something like that. With Vault, you actually get to stick it in just about every menu. So you can put it under the File menu, the Tools menu. You can put it under a context menu, and a bunch of most of the toolbars you can put your command in. You can also do submenus. So if you want to group them all together, that's a good way of doing it. You can determine when your commands are visible based on the selected entity class. So if you've got an operation that only works on files, you can specify that, and your command will only show up if a file is selected. It doesn't get any more granular than that, though. So let's say you want to only have your command show up if it's a drawing file. That's not something you can do. It's either all files or no files. You can't get any more specialized. Let's see, moving on. Another thing you can do is you can tell Vault Explorer to do a refresh after your command completes. So that's nice if you're changing things. You'll want to do a refresh when it's over, and that's built in. We also have kind of a feature that lets you hide one of the existing commands. You can't get rid of it entirely, but you can like remove it from the menus. This is usually I'll talk about this more a bit later, but I mean it's useful in certain cases where you want to provide your own logic for a certain command, and you don't want people using the default logic. Okay, let me go over the bad news. So here's the things that it doesn't do. So first, anything you customize is in isolation to the other commands or the other tabs. So, you've got your command which does its own thing, and then, Vault Explorer has its default commands and they do their own thing. And there's not really much interaction between different commands. And just to kind of elaborate more on that point, so you can't really modify an existing command. So let's take something like copy design. you can't really go into copy design and change things around. Now, we've got this idea of a pre and a post, which you can do. So if you want to do things before and after copy design, you can do that. But you can't modify the actual command itself. Again, it's independent of your commands. There's no way to launch another command. So again, if you've got your thing and you want to fire off a copy design, there's no way to invoke that command through code. The user has to click on the command. And you can't change the selected items. And you can't navigate to other spots or anything like that. Those are things the user has to do. Okay, so in the video I showed how to manually do the reset. There's also a programmatic way to do the reset. What you need to do is you need to go in, you need to find this menus XML file, and that's going to be under the user's app data folder. So you go there, you go to Autodesk subfolder, and then there'll be a subfolder depending on what product they have installed. So there'll be something that says like Vault Collaboration 2012 or Vault Workgroup 2012. You go into that folder and then you go into the Objects folder, and there's where you see Menus XML. Delete that file. You have to delete it when Vault Explorer is not running. So Vault Explorer is shut down. You delete Menus XML. Then when you bring up Vault Explorer, it will rebuild all of the menus and toolbars, and your command will show up. So that's the way to do it in code. So you could build it into your installer or something if you wanted to. Okay, usually you're going to want to talk to the Vault server inside of your command, right? It wasn't part of my demo, but in the real world, you're not just going to want to pop up hello world. You're going to want to talk to the server and do things. So here's how you would reuse an existing connection. So there's this iApplication object that gets passed around a lot. So in most cases, you're going to be given this iApplication object. So like for example, during the onLogon event, you get this iApplication object. When your command is executed, that's one of the things that goes in the event args is an iApplication. Same with like a tab view. When the selection changes, you get a bunch of good things passed in, including iApplication object. Okay, so you've got this object. One of the pieces of data in it is the Vault context. And the Vault context contains all you need to know to create one of these user ID ticket credentials. So here in the slide deck I have some example code here. So you've got an iApplication object, you create your new credentials. The first parameter is the server name. And the way you get that is the Vault context has the beginning of the URL to the service in it. And you can just pass that whole thing in, and the credentials is smart because the URL has the server name in it. So the credentials is smart enough to pull out that server name. It'll also pull out other useful information, like if you're running on a different port. If Vault is not on port 80, that's all contained in the URL. And also if you're running SSL, that's part of the URL, and the user ID ticket credentials can pull all that stuff out and set up the connection for you. So so that's why that first parameter is kind of weird. And then the other three are pretty basic. You know, the next parameter is the Vault name. Then you've got this user ID and ticket, which are the tickets your authentication token. So keep in mind, you don't actually get to know things like the username and password, right? That would be kind of a security hole if we gave that to you. All you get to do is you get the minimum amount of information to piggyback off the existing connection, and that's all you really get to do. So you got your credentials, and then you can set up your web service manager and do all the things I showed you how to do in part 2. Okay, let's talk a bit more about custom tabs and custom commands. Just go over some of the miscellaneous details. I've only have one slide devoted to custom tabs. It's a pretty straightforward concept. I haven't really had many questions come in from people on it, so I don't have much to talk about here. So with a custom tab, when you set it up, you're gonna choose the entity type that it applies to, and that tab's gonna show up anytime that entity is selected. So if you create a file tab, it's going to show up for every file. Again, there's no way to kind of shorten the criteria. There's no way to say, well, I only want to show up on DWG files. If I've got a text file selected, don't show my tab. That's not something you can do. It's all or nothing in terms of files. So that's something to keep in mind. Your code gets invoked when the selection changes. And I believe it's only if someone selects into that object type. So if somebody selects a file, you get a trigger for that. If somebody then goes and selects an item, you will not get a trigger because it's not your entity type. So the event args is only going to have a single entity as the selection set. Even if the user does a multi-select in the main grid, you're not going to know about the multi-select. You're only going to know the last selected item. And if you look at Vault Explorer, all tabs work this way. It always applies to a single selected object. It doesn't understand multi-select. Okay, so some of the mechanics of it. When you set up your custom tab, what you're going to do is you're going to build up a user control. So you can do this pretty easily in Visual Studio. You set up a new user control, and it's kind of like a dialog, but you don't get the dialog buttons or anything like that. It's just kind of a gray box where you can drag controls into it. So you build up your user control class, and when you set up your tab view, you're going to pass back what the type, what the object type is of this control that you created. Vault Explorer will actually be the one creating your control. You don't ever new up the control yourself. Vault Explorer will call new, create that control, and then when the event happens, it will pass in your control object. And then you can go to that object and make function calls and change property data and things like that on your object. But you don't ever have to create it yourself. And then the last bullet is more of kind of a best practices type thing. Based on other people's experiences, you probably don't want to do edit operations inside of a tab. It's great for things like displaying properties, but if you want to edit a property value, that's kind of hard because first off, how do you know when the user wants to, is finished making changes, right? If you've got, let's say you've got the author property and the user's typing in the author name, well, how do you know when they're done typing? You don't want to commit the change until you're sure that the user's done, because committing the change is kind of hard. You have to talk to the server and you have to update the property on the Vault server and things like that. So you want some way to know when the user is done. Also, at any point, the user could leave your tab and go somewhere else, and you have no control over that. So most people have found that it's best to do edit type things inside of a dialog, where you've got the OK button and things like that in place. So yeah, when you put it all together, I mean, custom tabs are useful in certain contexts, but always make sure to ask yourself whether you really need to have a tab, or if it's better to just do it as a custom command. Because like I said, if you create a file tab, it's always going to be there on every file, and if you've got 5 of these things, it's really going to clutter up the UI. So it's great for certain things, but in a lot of cases, it's not as good of a fit as you might think early on. So that's it on custom tabs. Let me move back to custom commands. When your custom command gets executed, the event args will have a bunch of context information passed in. So you're gonna get a bunch of different selection sets, and that corresponds to what's selected in the various window panes inside of Vault Explorer. So the nav selection set is the navigation tree on the left. So whatever's selected there will show up in the selection set. I believe you're always going to get 1 item in this set, if anything, 0 or 1 items, but it still comes as an enumeration. So, in theory, there might be multiple, but I don't think it's possible in the current release. So that's the nav selection set. The view selection set is kind of the main grid, and that will give you all of the selected, either the selected object or the selected objects if there's a multi-select. And then on the bottom is the preview selection set. If it's one of the default tabs, depending on what type of tab it is, there might be selection information there. And again, it could be a single thing selected, it could be multiple things selected, or maybe there's nothing at all there. There's also there's a 4th selection set in the event args called current selection set. That is basically going to contain, it'll either be the navigation selection set, the view selection set, or the preview selection set, depending on which one is the active window pane. So only one of these panes is going to be active at any given time, and the current selection set will have the selection from the active pane. It's also possible that the current selection set will be empty. It's possible that none of those panes are active. So keep that in mind too. So what does a selection set look like? Well, it's a collection of iSelection objects. And what is an iSelection object? Well, let's see. It's got information on the underlying entity. So let's see. It's got the display text. So whatever the user sees is going to be in the selection object. It's going to have something that indicates what type of object the selection. Is it a file? Is it a folder? That type of thing. And then it's going to have an ID. And that ID lets you go back to the server and look up the object. So for files, it could have the file ID. For folders, it'll have the folder ID, that sort of thing. So you definitely want to make sure to check the type, because the ID is useless unless you know what type it is. And then I should also mention, so in Vault 2012 we've got this concept of links, where you can you can like select a file and then copy it and then paste as link into another folder. So that way it shows up kind of like a shortcut. If a link is selected and your command is run, your iSelection is going to show the underlying, whatever that link is pointing to is what shows up in your link. So keep that in mind. From your point of view, you have no idea if a link is selected or the real file is selected. It's completely transparent to you. Okay, let me talk a bit more about these selection objects. So I mentioned the ID, the meaning of the ID depends on what type it is. So I've got this little table here that kind of helps you decode it. So for files, we actually have two different cases here. We've got a case where you've got, in the main grid, if a file selection is selected, it's really showing the latest file, right? So the ID you get back is a master ID. So the functions you can call with that in the Vault API are different than if you've got a regular file ID. So yeah, if something's selected in the preview pane, like in the history tab, that's going to be a file version, a specific version of a file, and in that case, the selection ID is going to be a file ID. The rest of the cases are pretty simple. Folder gives you a folder ID. In the case of an item, there's two different contexts. There's like the main grid selecting an item, and there's also like the bomb tree selecting an item. In both of these cases, I mean, they show up as different types, but the underlying ID is the same. It's an item ID. Change orders, you get a change order ID. That's pretty obvious. Now, if something is selected that doesn't fit one of these categories, it's going to come back as other, and then the ID is basically going to be meaningless to you. So one example is if you've got a saved search and you select the saved search on the navigation tree, the navigation selection set is going to have an object in it for that selection, but the type is going to be other because saved search isn't really an entity. And so the type's going to be other and the ID is going to be -1. So just in your code, make sure that you filter out types that you don't care about. There's also the none type, but I don't think we use it anywhere. But again, none and other kind of mean the same thing to you. It's just data that you can't do anything with. Okay, I'll just talk a bit about debugging. The recommended way to debug is in Visual Studio, at least in the full version of Visual Studio. You can tell it to launch Vault Explorer in debug mode, and then you can put breakpoints in your code, and as the application hits those breakpoints, it'll halt the program, and then you can debug in Visual Studio. So very nice, powerful feature. I've been told that the Express version doesn't let you do this. So I don't know. I haven't tested that out myself. So just keep in mind, it might be trickier if you're in the Express version. But if you get the full version, this is definitely the way to go. You start up Vault Explorer, and then you just debug like any other program. It's pretty good stuff. Let's see. Another thing to talk about is icons. With your custom command, you can choose to have an icon sit next to it. I highly recommend them. It's a great way to really quickly separate out the custom commands from the non-custom commands, or the kind of like the default behavior. Now, after playing around with a bit, I think the recommended approach is to have a 32 by 32 PNG file as your icon. However, it might get displayed as 16 by 16. So they'll be displayed in one of the two, depending on where it shows up, it'll either be 32 by 32 or 16 by 16. So make sure that it looks good in both of those sizes. And that's actually the part that's the biggest pain. You can build it and it can look all pretty in 32 by 32, and then it'll look like complete garbage when you scale it down. So you could also go the other way if you want. If you want to define it as 16 by 16 and have it scale up, that works too. Again, just make sure it looks good. you can do transparency. That's why I recommend the PNG file, is because it's got transparency support. So that's a pretty nice thing to do, is to set the transparent color. And then the last bullet point is kind of counterintuitive. If you have an ICO file, that's not supported. It has to be basically the API will want you to pass in an image object, and ICO files are not image objects. There are utilities in .NET where you can convert an ICO to an image, but it will only take one of the sizes. It's not like you can build up an ICO with all 4 different sizes and pass that all right in. You have to pick one and send that in. So if you're going to do that, you might as well just build up your PNG. Okay, I talked a bit about the hidden command feature. That's something we did a couple years ago before we had a robust event mechanism built in. So that was kind of our way of customizing existing commands. Was we could say, well, just hide the command and build your own command. So it's still in the product for compatibility reasons, but in most cases you don't want to use this approach. You want to use events to customize things. It's a bit better of an experience for the user, and it's less work that you have to do because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And again, I'll talk more about events in part 5. But here's some. I have played around a bit with hiding commands, and here's kind of the best practices I recommend. First off, don't take away critical functionality. So if you're hiding the delete command or something like that, make sure that you provide something that replaces the delete command or the equivalent type replacement. If you just take it away and don't provide anything in place of it, you're going to have some really angry users. One good approach is to replace a command with something that's a superset of the command. That way the user doesn't really miss anything. And then kind of the last point is, depending on what command you hide, certain commands are a lot more work to customize, well, to rebuild, so to speak, than others. For example, if you're hiding the copy design command, well, good luck. It's going to take you a long time to build up your own copy design feature. I mean, that dialogue is just massive. I mean, man years have gone into that feature. So for you to try to replace it with your own, you're probably not going to be able to do it in a pretty fashion. Also, the more complex it is, the more likely you're missing some weird, corner case that you just haven't thought of. Whereas us on the Vault team, we've probably, hopefully we've programmed in all the corner cases, right? So again, if you can leverage our command, it's much better to do. I do actually have an example that I think is a pretty good example of how to hide commands correctly. Up on my blog is a program called Hyperlink Maestro, and what it does is it takes the copy hyperlink command and hides it, and it provides its own copy hyperlink command. And that command does everything the old command does, but it does more. So I found personally it works great. It just plops right in, and then you have all these other options you can do for creating different links. So like if you want to link into the web client, you can do that with Hyperlink Maestro, but you can't do that with the default command. Okay, so just kind of a note on what I'm going to call Vault extensions. or plugins or add-ons or whatever you want to call them. But the idea that you're writing something that's getting loaded into Vault. You're not creating an exe of your own. You're creating a DLL. There's different in the next in parts 4 and 5. I'm going to be going over other features, but those features are also going to be plugins, and the rules for creating those and the steps and the deployment steps are all going to be very, very similar. So I just thought I'd kind of like, I'd like to point that out, that all of these steps I've shown, they're going to come up again and again. So there's kind of a common set of rules. So the step where I had to set all those assembly attributes, that's going to show up again. Deploying to this program data folder, or program data, Autodesk, extensions, blah, blah, blah. That's all the same, and same with the vset config file. Those are all kind of requirements for creating your own extensions, and they're going to come up again. So just kind of like to point out that framework. Now I feel I should mention scripting a bit. We do kind of have a story here for customizing Vault with the use of scripts, and it's pretty new. I just posted this to my blog last week, but it's called VLogic. It's something you can download and install, and what it basically allows you to do is create your own commands by bypassing pretty much everything I've told you in this past lecture. So yeah, you install it, you'll get this VLogic menu. You can just create your own new commands, and you use PowerShell as your language. So PowerShell supports .NET, so all of these objects that we've been using, all of the Vault API and everything is available inside of PowerShell scripts. And VLogic is set up that it'll pass in a manager for you, a web service manager. So you can start it up and you can immediately start making calls to the server. You also get the context object as well. So you've got an easy way to see what's been selected and things like that. So like I said, it's up on my blog, but my blog isn't really an official, the samples up there are not officially supported. So this is something that I kind of put together. I felt I should mention it for all you out there that like working with scripts, instead of having to always compile Visual Studio and restart and deal with it that way. If you'd rather just do scripting, then make sure to check out VLogic and let me know what you think. But yeah, there's no official support. It's not part of the SDK, which is why I'm mentioning it at the end here. But it is something that I think is pretty cool, and hopefully will get a lot of use. So yeah, the advantages of this thing is you don't need to deal with all of those steps, the deployment step, the attribute step, the compile step. All of those are bypassed. But on the flip side, it's not as easy to debug, and it's harder to build UI inside of a script. So there's kind of a trade-off there. That's really it for this this presentation. So if you want to know more, check the SDK, check my blog. If you're a member of Autodesk Developer Network, they fully support the SDK. So pretty much everything I've said, except for VLogic, is supported. And there's a Vault API news group that you can post questions to. I think I've talked about my blog enough, so I won't plug it anymore. But when my videos are done, this is where I'm going to be posting my videos, is to my blog. I'm not going to be posting them to GoToMeeting because they only let you post a video, and I want to post more than that. I'm going to post the video and the slide deck and the sample program and everything. It's all going to be in a nice package for you. So that's going to be up on my blog. And that's it for this presentation. I'll stick around and answer questions, so just just type them in, and I'll answer them.